Hi guys, Rob here for Beyond the Brush. Today we're going to be building a plastic miniature. So we have a miniature from Games Workshop. They come in these frames called sprues, and this is the way you will almost certainly get any plastic miniatures that you buy. Certainly from Games Workshop, they produce them like this. The tools we're going to need, pretty much the same as for metal miniatures. We're going to need a pair of cutters. I've got my flat-sided cutters here. We're going to need a knife. I've got a nice new blade in this, you can see it's nice and shiny. And we're going to need glue. In this case, the glue is different. We're not going to be using super glue, we're going to be using specialised plastic cement. My particular favourite is this Tamiya Extra Thin, and you can see from inside the bottle it's almost like water. Flows really well, which can be a problem if you're not used to it. So I would only recommend this if you're used to building plastic miniatures. If you're not, there are various other companies that produce them. Revell produce their Contactor Professional, which is very good. It comes with a pin. I don't know if I can get the top off of this one, it's very old. No, so it comes with a pin which is useful for getting into small places. There are also various other companies that produce them. Humbrol produce their liquid poly, and this has a brush on it, and this is very thick. This is a very sort of thick polystyrene cement, and that's quite useful because you can sort of dab it onto one surface and then match the two surfaces together, and it makes life a lot easier. Because it's so thick. There is also Yoo-Hoo produced their own, and you can see in the bottle this one is quite thick as well. So it's certainly a lot thicker than the Tamiya, and again this comes with a brush, and you can see that it's really gloopy. Each one has its own purposes. I find these quite useful if I've got one surface that I need to stick to another surface. This is quite useful if I've got two surfaces that I can join together, and then essentially sort of use the small brush in this to sort of put a line around it, and the wicking effect will sort of take the glue into the join and join it. So the way these work is they chemically melt the plastic. And actually sort of once they're completely dissolved and the plastic sort of dries essentially, what you're left with is not so much a sort of plastic glue plastic bond. It is actually sort of the plastic it's essentially welded together. You can use super glues with these models if you really want to, if that's all you've got, if you don't want to sort of get another set of glue. You can use super glues with these, that's no problem, but to be honest I would strongly recommend getting I know GW Games Workshop do their own version of these kind of glues, and I would strongly recommend getting it because you'll get a much better build using those kind of glues. So that's the glue. So onto the model itself, what you'll find is that the model is joined, sort of the individual bits of the model. Again, it's a sort of multi-part thing. Virtually all plastic models are, purely because of the way they're sort of made. So what you'll find is that they're joined to the sprue through these sort of connecting points. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to clip off these connecting points. Now the way you do that is I use these sort of flat side cutters, so you can see on one side they're completely flat and sort of the blades are supposed to be flush to each other, but mine are a bit old so they're not quite. And then the other side is the sort of the indented one, the indented side. So there you go, you can see better there. So what you do is you come out, get close in. So what you don't want to do is go hard up against the model because you stand a chance of damaging the model. So come a little bit away, like a millimetre or so, and then just clip in. And what you'll be left with is a small nub on the actual model that you can then cut off with a knife. So again, come in here, and then this one's quite a thick one, so a bit of effort on that one. And then again round to this one, and there. So that part's now free. what you do need to be careful with is on some parts, like for example this perfect example, you'll find that there's sort of quite a thick area of the model sort of along here, and then there's a thin area up here. You need to be careful when you're clipping these off, because you can actually end up, if you clip both of these off and then knock it, because these two are still connected, you can end up snapping the model sort of along a sort of point, which obviously isn't great. So what I would recommend for these kind of parts is very carefully clip these two out first to free the delicate part, and then you can clip these two out, and you're not in any danger of snapping these parts as long as you're careful. But beyond that, it's fairly simple. There's sort of nothing really to it. Plastic's soft enough that you shouldn't have to put too much effort in. It kind of depends on sort of how thick. Obviously, sort of some on the feet some of these joints are quite thick, so you might have to put a little bit of effort in to clip those, but nothing major. So after that, you've got your part out, and then you're on to cleanup, which is very similar to a metal model. You've got the little sort of nubs that you previously sort of left on the model when you were clipping it out of the sprue. These just need to come off. So again, knife sharp, be careful with it, don't stab it into your fingers, and take the knife and then just sort of do your best to just sort of trim off the little nubs left over without damaging the model. And there you go, that one's fantastic. That one came off really nicely actually. And then there's one up here. This one's going to be a bit more tricky because it's in a sort of depression, so it's in a sort of concave area, so you're going to have to be a little bit more careful getting that one out. It's also quite thick as well, so because what can happen is if you're cutting into it, you're just going to go slam straight into the edge of the model, and you're going to end up gouging out the model because the plastic's so soft. So I'm just going to very carefully trim that. You can also scrape, similarly to a metal model, you can scrape away sort of the edge just to make sure that it's nice and flat. And I think there's one more. Yep, there it is. So there we go. So one more little nub there. I'm just going to trim that off. Lovely, that one came off nicely. So you'll also get flash lines on these mould lines. Games Workshop models tend to be okay with mould lines. You get some. The interesting thing about plastic models is that the mould lines tend to sort of waver all over the place. This isn't down to sort of the casting material being too soft or anything like that, it's just the way the moulds are made. It gets quite complicated, but essentially it's difficult to put detail on the edge of a plastic model because the moulds have to be made out of solid metal, so you can't sort of flex the mould to get the piece out. The piece has to be able to literally just fall out of the model, so fall out of the mould even. So what you'll find is that sort of you can put detail on that side and that side, but you can't put very much detail on that side. Everything has to be able to slide out, so you can't sort of put bits sticking out at that kind of angle, or sort of that kind of angle, and expect them to come out, because they're just not going to. They'll just snap off in the mould. So plastic models have to be designed very carefully to take that into account. Anyway, so we've got a couple of mould lines, and again these can just be scraped same way as we did for the metal model, being a bit more careful because the plastic model obviously you can damage a lot easier than you can a metal model, and simply because the material's softer. So again, just sort of try and get the sort of the knife into all of the areas that you can, and just sort of scrape away all of those mould lines. GW models tend to not be too bad with the mould lines. I've seen some fairly horrendous ones, but they tend to be sort of older sculpts and models and things. The nice thing is because the moulds for the plastic models are actually solid metal, they don't wear, or at least sort of they don't wear anywhere near as much as the silicone moulds for resin and metal models do. So what you'll find is that sort of once you've had a cast out of a plastic, sort of as a plastic model, you can pretty much guarantee that sort of every cast using the same mould from that point on is going to be just as good. which is quite nice because it means you can do quality control a lot easier. The downside, of course, is that sort of making those metal moulds is significantly more expensive. So you'll tend to find that plastic models are produced, sort of they're mass produced by a company like Games Workshop, or sort of they're mass produced for a board game, say Kingdom Death or something along those lines. And it's purely down to the cost of the sort of the plastic, the moulding process. The moulds for plastic models can cost an absolute fortune. But once you've got them, you can then just produce the models to your heart's content, really. Although you do need some specialised equipment, it's not something you can do in your home, really. So, again, all the usual stuff, just sort of scraping over the mould lines, checking it over, making sure it's okay. You can get ones like in here, which are a bit of a nightmare to get to, but you're just going to have to sort of just do your best to try and sort of get in there with a knife. The bits will bend slightly. You don't want to bend them too much, obviously, because they might break off. But beyond that, you can sort of flex them a little bit if need be. So I'm fairly happy with that. That seems to have come out okay. I think this is the front of his body, actually. Not sure. So that seems to have that's come out quite nicely. So what I'll do, to save time, I'll do this for the rest of the parts and then we'll come back. So I've clipped all the pieces out from the sprues, cleaned them all up, scraped all the mould lines off, things like that, and I've got them all here in front of me. Now, when it comes to putting these together, Games Workshop usually provide fairly good instructions on how the model should go together. If you're coming from a different manufacturer and they don't have instructions, then it's pretty much just going to be guesswork based on sort of what the model looks like when it's built, things like that. Normally what I would do is I would start with the biggest pieces you can find and put those two together. So in this case it's going to be the two body parts. So we've got the front and the back of the body here in this, and they go together quite nicely. You can see there will be a small seam, and this is where the extra thin cement comes in very, very handy, because normally what you'd have to do is you'd have to go around all of these edges, so all of these flat edges in here, go around all of those and put the glue on that edge, and then join up the other piece and sort of hope that you got the glue in the right place. With the extra thin, what I can do is hold the two pieces together, and then I can just run along the seam line so we go around just putting a small amount of glue. You really don't need much of this because it's a chemical reaction, into the gaps where you can. And you can see on the edge there, it's kind of joining the two pieces together, and given about half an hour or so, that will be a nice solid join. The problem with this thin glue is that it tends to go everywhere, much like a wash. When you're painting, the glue will go everywhere, so you have to be very, very careful and only use as much as you need, because you can end up with these brushes getting a huge, great big sort of drip of glue on the end. You don't want that. You want sort of very, very little, and then just touch it to the join and it'll soak into that join quite nicely. The problem is if it goes everywhere, then because of the way the glue works, is because it actually sort of chemically melts the plastic, what you can end up doing is putting thumbprints everywhere and things like that, and it just generally sort of turns out to be a bit of a mess. Which is why for beginners I would recommend something like this glue instead, the slightly thicker glue. I think the stuff that Games Workshop produces is also not quite this thick, but probably sort of fairly similar, and that, because of its sort of thickness and viscosity, you can sort of dab it into places. But what you can't do is this technique, of sort of welding the joins together, putting the bits together and then welding it, unfortunately. So the next biggest bit is probably going to be his arm. Now this bit is going to go in here somewhere, I think. Yeah, something like that. So sort of he's holding his arm out like that. So what I'll do for this one is I'll actually show how to use the other glues. So if we get the Yoo-hoo out, and again, you really don't need much of this. You can see it sort of pretty much dripping off the brush. You do not need that much. So put a little bit on, take the part of the model, sort of one half of the model you need to stick, and then very carefully sort of dab round where the model is going to stick together. You can do this on either half, it doesn't really matter. So there we go. So we've now got a nice, you can see, sort of shiny, nice sort of dob of glue all around the area, and then we just match them up and stick them. Because of the viscosity, this stuff will stick pretty much instantly, and will also then help to sort of hold the pieces together whilst the welding effect takes place. So that's how to use those glues. Fairly similar to the way you'd use super glue, to be honest. There's no real difference. You don't have to do anything strange with it. The nice thing about it is you don't have to sit there and hold it together for sort of 10, 15, 20 seconds whilst the super glue takes hold. This stuff's pretty much instant, and because the pieces are nice and light, you don't need to worry about it. You do have a little bit of play time with the pieces, so you can sort of wiggle the pieces if need be to get them into place, but otherwise, sort of once the thing is once they're stuck with this stuff, you aren't getting it apart, not without smashing the model, basically, because the glue, it's not, as I said, it's not gluing the pieces together, it is literally welding the plastic together, which makes for a very, very strong join, but also has the sort of downside of being incredibly difficult to actually get apart. So we'll go for, I think, probably the head next. Essentially, if I put the arm on, the arm's going to go on somewhere around here. It's going to make the head quite difficult to get into with sort of the sword and the hand in the way. So if I go for the head next, and that goes on, so like that. Kind of difficult to show you, so it's kind of sort of sticking out. Again, Games Workshop models are quite nicely engineered with the way they actually produce them. They usually go together really, really well. So that bit, yeah, kind of goes on like that. So there's a little bit of a lip that sort of goes under his chin by the looks of things, and then the rest of it sort of moves into place. So that's quite nice. So what I'll do with this one, because I've built lots of these models, I can do this with the Tamiya plastic cement. You can actually put it on there. You have to be extremely careful with it and use it very, very sparingly if you're going to do that, though, because of the sort of wicking effect. It has a tendency of wanting to go absolutely everywhere. So once that's sort of hold the head in position, and because the Tamiya isn't as viscous, you have to kind of hold it in position a little bit till the welding effect takes place, and then there you go, job done. So because there's a bit of a gap around there, I'm also going to just put a little bit over his neck, just to sort of help it stick. So there we go. So that's his head on, his body together. So we've got a few pieces left. We've got a piece there and the sword arm. Now it looks like this little dangly bit is going to come out of his mouth. Now what you'll see is in his mouth there's a square hole. If you can just see that, there you go. So you can just see a sort of diamond square hole, and on the end of the piece is a sort of square lump of plastic. So those two need to marry up. Now if I'd been sensible about it, it would have been a heck of a lot easier to put this onto the head before I actually stuck the head to the body, but I wasn't paying attention. So I'm just going to dob some glue into his mouth. In this case it doesn't matter if it runs too far because it's in a concave area, so it's not going to go very far, and because it's in his mouth it's not really going to show. So there we go, just kind of stick that in position and it's going to hold quite nicely. So last thing to put on before we glue him onto his little base is the arm. Now let's see, how does the arm fit? So in this case looks like he's going to be holding the sword outwards like this, so it's going to be a matter of, yeah, it looks like it's going to go like that. So there's a sort of L shape cut into the elbow joint there, and it looks like it's going to sort of fit in there like that. So that's okay. So we're going to take some of the glue again not too much because you don't want to flood it, and we're going to put it on both surfaces of that L shape. Then again we're going to marry that up in the right position, hold it there for a few seconds until the welding effect takes place, and there we go. So that's fantastic. There we go, that's pretty much built. It's difficult to say whether I prefer plastic models. Plastic models are a lot easier to build, there's no doubt about it. With this kind of sort of liquid polystyrene cement, it makes life a lot easier because the models will stay together, they'll take a lot of punishment. You'll snap the plastic before you snap any of the pieces off, which isn't like metal, where you're much more likely to break the superglue joins before you actually break the model. Resin is different again, because resin is extremely delicate, so you're much more likely to actually break the resin than you are the superglue join. But resin models you have to be a lot more careful with, and we'll cover that in the next video. So there we go. So that's pretty much done, really. Sort of all built, put together. The only thing really left to do is going to be to put him on his base. Now normally I wouldn't really want to use one of these bases because I prefer to build my own bases, but in this case he's actually got claws moulded onto the base, which is really quite annoying. I'm not a fan of that at all. You can see sort of where they fit in on there. Not a fan of that, but we'll have to live with it. So they're going to go in there. So it looks like we're essentially going to be putting glue on the base of his feet. Ooh, too much, way too much. Be careful with that. And then offer it up into position. There it goes. And then again, just hold it for a second, and a little bit longer. It looks like the entrails coming off his body are also wanting to stick, so I'm going to put a little bit of glue in those where they connect to the base, just to give it a bit of extra support, and that will hold nicely. So there we go. There is our Herald of Nurgle, all built up and ready to go. Alright, I'll see you later, guys.